Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our first sixth grade math weekly preview video for the content that you're going to teach your students the week of September the 19th through the 23rd. How exciting that you guys get the opportunity to stand in front of students and deliver to them this beautiful subject of mathematics and have them discover all the wonderful things that we want them to know about this subject. And so let me introduce myself. My name is Ryan Castle. I'm the K-12 math coordinator here in Mesquite ISD, and I'm so excited that you've joined us for this overview of your week for September the 19th. We're going to dive into the TEKs that you'll be covering that week, look at some of the questions that you'll ask students, and dive into some of the STAR released questions for the two TEKs that you'll cover for this week. So I hope you're excited, and let's go ahead and dive right in. So for the week of September the 19th, we're going to be finishing up our discussion of TEK 6.4G, which has students writing equivalent forms of fractions, decimals, and percents using real-world problems. And then we will begin our discussion about how to solve real-world problems several different ways involving percents and parts and wholes. And so on Monday and Tuesday, we'll finish up 4G, and then on Wednesday through Friday, we'll start 5B, and you'll continue that on into the week of September the 26th. Real quick, I want to point out the frequency of these TEKs on the STAR test. 4G is a readiness standard, but it's only been tested 7 times in the last 5 years. So for a readiness standard, that's actually pretty low. But for 5B, this one is tested nearly 2 times every year. It's been tested 9 times in the last 5 years. And so these are obviously very important TEKs. They are high priority. We want to make sure that we're giving students ample practice with these TEKs to get to mastery, and we want to be able to show them all the different ways that this could possibly be tested on the STAR test. So as we dive into TEK 4G, again, as I mentioned earlier, you've already begun this TEK on Thursday. And so you've already planned that, you've already got that, you're ready to teach that part coming up on Thursday and Friday. But on Monday and Tuesday of the week of the 19th, you're going to finish off talking about how to change decimals to percents and percents to decimals. And then the 4th day on Tuesday, September the 20th, will be a practice and a review day of all the different ways that students have to be able to write fractions, decimals, and percents. And on day 3, we're going to use those skills that we learned in day 1 and day 2 to really think about the conceptual reason that a decimal is changed to a percent by moving the decimal point, and vice versa whenever we change a percent to a decimal. So day 3 is really going to draw on the concepts that you taught in day 1 and day 2. So as we dive into TEK 4G, these will be the first 2 problems that your students look at on Monday as their warm-up. And this is going to draw on the skills that they learned the previous week on Thursday and Friday to help them understand conceptually what they're going to be practicing today, which is changing percents to decimals and decimals to percents. And so if we look at number 1, what percent and fraction is equivalent to 0.22? Well, you can remind students that on Thursday of last week, they learned how to change a decimal to a fraction. They know that 0.22 really means 22/100ths, or as a fraction, 22 divided by 100. Then, in order to get that as a reduced fraction, then we would just divide by 2. And so 11 divided by 50 would be our fraction form of 0.22. Then you also remind the students that they learned how to turn a fraction into a percent. And so then what we can do is have them actually do that by setting up the percent proportion. And so 11 over 50 is equal to our percent over 100. What we notice is that in the denominator, we're multiplying by 2, and so therefore we're going to multiply the numerator by 2 as well, so that we know that this is 22%. After you have students do this, ask them if they see a pattern or something that would help them to know the answer without having to do all the work. And so hopefully they'll start to see the connection between 0.22 and 22%. On number 2, have them guess what they think the answer might be, converting 18% to a decimal. And then go into the steps of how to actually do this and see if their guess is correct. We don't want to immediately move the decimal. We want to allow the students to try to figure out themselves so that they can develop that conceptual knowledge of the difference between a percent and a decimal and how to change between the two forms. And so what we would do here on number 2 is we would take our 18% and divide it by 100, and we would reduce that to get 9/50. Then to go from a fraction to a percent, again, that's using the technique that they learned last Friday. We know that we're going to divide. And so 50 into 9 won't go any, so I'm going to have to put my decimal here and add a 0. Now 50 goes into 90 one time with a remainder of 40. Again, 50 will not go into 40, so I add my 0. And so now 50 goes into 408 times. And so that means as a fraction, 18% is 9/50, but as a decimal, it's 0.18. And so hopefully your students will start to see the pattern of just moving the decimal point in order to change between a decimal and a percent. By Tuesday of this week, we'll be practicing and reviewing TEK 4G, and so we want students to be to the level where they are able to answer star level questions. If we look at this first released item, this would be strategies that you taught them on day 3 of this TEK, which would have been the previous day on Monday. This is a very simple problem as long as students understand the process. A waiter earned a 17% tip. What decimal is equivalent to 17%? Instead of having students go through the process that I showed in the previous slide, that was more of a discovery piece to understand the rule. We would be okay with students just using the rule here of moving the decimal in order to get the correct answer. And so 17%, we know we're going to take that decimal and move it 2 places to the left so that we get a decimal representation of 0.17 for 17%. This would be the day 3 strategies that you taught your students or the skills that you taught. And so by day 4 on Tuesday, you would want them to be able to answer this star level question. But not only that, you'd also want them to be able to answer star level questions from the other conversion techniques or skills that you taught them on Thursday and Friday of the previous week. So for example, in this problem, we're told that a restaurant offered cooking classes on 24 of the 30 days in November. What decimal is equivalent to the fraction of days in November that classes were offered at the restaurant? And so the first thing that we would need students to do is to create a fraction. A restaurant offered cooking classes on 24 of the 30 days. And so that would be 24 divided by 30. We would then want to change that into a decimal so that we could get the correct answer. You could either have students do that straight from 24 divided by 30, or you could have them reduce this fraction or simplify it to be 4/5. This would make the numbers a little easier when they go to divide so that they are a little smaller. 4 divided by 5, remember, is going to be written as 5 on the outside, 4 on the inside. 5 cannot go into 4, so we add our decimal point and a 0, and then 5 goes into 40 8 even times. And so the decimal equivalent to 4/5 or 24/30 would be 0.8. This star released question will have students converting from a fraction, 3 divided by 8, to a percent. There are 2 different ways to have your students do this, and you can pick which one you want to teach and which one you feel like your students will do better with. One of the ways is to set up a percent proportion. 3/8 is equal to the percentage over 100, and then cross multiply and divide. And so if I cross multiply here, I'm going to get 3 times 100, which is 300, and then I'm going to be dividing that number by 8. 8 will go into 30 3 times with a remainder of 6, and then bring down my 0. 8 will go into 60 7 times, and 7 times 8 will give me 56 with a remainder of 4. Well, 8 does not go into 4, so that's where I have to add in my decimal point. and so therefore 8 will go into 40 5 even times. And so we're getting 37.5 whenever we do those calculations, and that ends up being a percent. And so B would be the correct answer. The other way to do this would be to have the students go from this fraction to a decimal. That decimal that they get is 3.75. The problem with that method is that 3.75 is an answer choice. And so setting this up as a percent proportion may be the better way to go for your students so that they understand I'm going straight from a fraction to a percent by setting up this percent proportion and not having to then do the additional step of taking that decimal and putting it into a percent. So I would highly recommend going with the first method and teaching your students that when they're going from a fraction to a percent, just to set up a percent proportion and then either cross multiply or find an equivalent fraction. As we get to Wednesday, we dive into a new TEK 6.5b. This TEK has 3 different parts to it that we will split up over different class periods. On Wednesday, we will focus on finding the percent given the part and the whole in a real-world problem. Thursday, we will move into finding the part given the whole and the percent, and Friday will be an extra practice day on that skill. You will do the final part of this TEK in the following week of instruction. You'll notice that the frequency on STAR is very even when it comes to these 3 different skills. It's been tested 3 times each of the 3 ways. And so it will be very important as a PLC for you guys to discuss strategies to give students to try to figure out what exactly they are trying to find. And it will also be important for you to have students communicate to you on every problem what exactly it is that they are trying to find. On day 1, we're going to be practicing finding the percent whenever we're given the part and the whole, which is going to be this part of the TEK. In this particular STAR released question, we read that yesterday 170 guests at a hotel called for room service and 255 guests did not call for room service. And we want to know what percentage of the guests at this hotel called for room service yesterday. And so in order to find this percentage, we're going to take whatever part did call for room service and divide that by the whole. Now, this question is a little tricky because it did not straight up give us the whole. We have some guests who did call for room service and some guests who did not. And so in order to find our whole, we're going to have to take those 2 parts and add them together, 170 plus 255. If we do that vertically so that it's a little easier to do the hand calculations, we get 5 and then 12, carry the 1, and that will give us 425 whole guests for our whole. The part that we are looking for is the number of guests at this hotel that did call for room service. And so looking back into the problem, that's going to be the 170. We need to get this fraction into a percent. And so this is now going back to the skills that we learned in the previous TEK that we covered, 4G, to convert my fraction into a percent. The best way to probably do this one, because the numbers are so big, is to actually divide this first to get a decimal and then convert that decimal into a percentage. And so we're going to divide up. It'll be 425 going into 170. Well, 425 will not go into 170, so I have to add my decimal point, which means I can now add as many decimals as I want, or as many zeros as I want after the decimal. And so now I need to figure out how many times does 425 go into 1,700. Well, you can estimate that and think that 4 goes into 16 about 4 times. So maybe we'll just try 4 and see how we do. 425 times 4 is going to give us 5 times 4, which is 20, carry the 2. 2 times 4 is 8, plus the 2 is 0, and then add the 1. 4 times 4 is 16, add the 1 is 17. So we end up with 1,700 for a remainder of And so the decimal that we get is 0.4 or 0.40. We then need to convert that into a percentage, which we learned how to do on Monday of this week just by moving the decimal point 2 places to the right and adding a percent sign. And so therefore the percentage of guests that did call for room service would be 40%. As we get into questions on day 2 that ask us for the part given the whole and the percent, it's really a good idea to utilize models to help students pause and read the word problem. This helps them to understand what the question is asking, and it also gives you a chance as the teacher to see their thinking and if they know what is actually happening in the problem. In this problem, we have 250 customers that are purchasing gas. We are told that 72% of those customers also make an additional purchase. So this right here would represent 72% that make the additional purchases. That's, of course, out of always 100%, and we want to know how many people actually made an additional purchase. And so we are going to set up a percent proportion here in order to help us solve this problem. We know that 72% of our people made additional purchases, and that is always out of 100%. Then we also know that there were in total or whole 250 people, and so that will go in the denominator of the other fraction. From here, we can either use the idea of equivalent fractions or we can cross multiply and divide to get our answer. And so what we can do here is multiply 250 times 72. So that would be this part right here, 250 times 72. Doing that calculation real quick will give us 18,000. So 18,000 is what we will get there. And then we're going to be dividing that by 100. So 18,000 divided by 100. We can use the zeros trick here to eliminate 2 of our zeros whenever we divide by 100, which is the same thing as moving the decimal place 2 spaces to the left. And so what we end up with is a number of people of 180 that purchased something additional at this gas station. On day 3, you're still going to be finding the part, but you're going to be doing it in 2-step problems. So the students will have to think through what the additional step might be in order to answer the question. Another way to teach this that I think is helpful is to think of it as being part divided by whole is equal to the percent. Then in this problem, what we see is that Christy surveyed her 20-student class about their favorite color. Well, that is the whole in this scenario, 20. Then we are told that how many students chose green or red as their favorite color. So we are looking for what is the part of that whole of 20 that chose either green or red. And we are told that the percent that chose either green or red is going to be 25% plus 40%. And so that's going to give us 65%. Now, we remember from our previous lessons earlier this week how to convert that percentage to a fraction. And so 65% we know is the same thing as 0.65 as a decimal, which now is read as 65/100ths. So then you can write this as 65 over 100, and that gives you the percent proportion that you're going to use in order to solve this problem. Something over 20 is equal to 65 over 100. You could also do this as a strip diagram as I modeled on the previous problem, and this will help you to see what your students' thinking is like in order for them to answer this question. From here, we would cross multiply, we would divide, and what we would end up with is an answer of 13 students who chose either red or green as their favorite color. That will do it for our video. We want to remind you that there are office hours Tuesday, September 13th in the afternoon from 4 to 4:30, where you can jump on and ask more questions about the content for the week of September 19th. Remember that as part of the pre-planning process, you want to also go back and work the other star-released questions that I did not cover in this video. Work through them and see if you can find the misconceptions or the places where your students might get tripped up, and then make sure that as a PLC, you talk about how you're going to address those in instruction. One last thing before we go, we want you to fill out this survey using the QR code or the link provided. That will let us know that you watched the video, and your feedback will help us serve you better in future videos. Thank you so much for all of the amazing work that you're doing for your students in the classroom, and we wish you great luck in planning for these lessons. And please feel free to reach out to us, either myself, Ryan Castle, or our middle school math facilitator, Paris Scott, with any questions.